at a time when the issues on the agenda for this meeting are very high on the political agenda all around. Such things as the right to return for the Palestinians, the national law in Israel, and the anti-Semitism so-called crisis. Let me first of all just introduce myself. I'm Christine Blower, and my credentials for chairing this meeting are that I am a patron of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign and very pleased. A staunch supporter, and I would also say friend, of Jeremy Corbyn. Both personally and through my union, I am a campaigner against racism, Islamophobia, and of course against anti-Semitism. And I have said in my conference speeches at NUT conference, that support for the cause and the case for a free Palestine and support for BDS is in no way a matter of anti-Semitism. Our first speaker is Richard Kuper, who is one of the founding signatories and founders of Jewish Voice for Labour, JVL.
Thank you very much, Christine. Thanks for the invitation to speak. I guess I'm one of the warm-up acts, and I'll try to take it slowly. These are troubled times, and we need to keep clear heads and not resort to oversimplistic analyses of where we're at and why. And outraged as we are, as I am, we need to think about where we are and what we can do and how to move forward. We share a lot in common tonight. That the Corbyn project is under severe attack is not in doubt. From the Tories, self-evidently. From a small proportion of Labour's membership, maybe, but from a large proportion of Labour's MPs, and from a large proportion still of the Labour Party bureaucracy. We are facing difficult times and a real crisis within the party. Labour is also under assault from the pro-Israel lobby, which has been alarmed for a long time by the prospect of a leader of the Labour Party who is actually committed to Palestinian rights. I take all this for granted. This is the background against which this meeting is taking place. And we're facing an immediate issue of the IHRA definition, the NEC Code of Conduct, and so on. And I'll come on to that in a minute. I just want to say the issue, the open hostility to Labour, predates Jeremy, and probably really started with Ed Miliband when he supported the non-binding motion which was passed in the House of Commons. This House urges the government to recognise the state of Palestine alongside the state of Israel. Passed overwhelmingly, with the Tories abstaining. It was enough for Maureen Lipman to tell us she would never vote Labour again. As soon as Jeremy was elected leader, the pro-Israel lobby was faced for the first time in its history with a Labour leader who meant it. And everything was done in order to stop the reality of a sustained, systematic campaign in support of Palestinian rights. Everything was held at Jeremy and the Labour Party, from being a Czech spy to having consorted with undesirable people, this, that, and the other. The weapon that has stuck is anti-Semitism. Now, I do not for a moment want to deny the reality of anti-Semitism among many forms of racism in our society. It is there, it is a cancer, it needs to be campaigned against, and it needs to be condemned. I believe the Labour Party has Jeremy tried with the Chakrabarti report to deal with the problem some while ago. It was derailed by a hostile bureaucracy, and for almost 18 months, nothing happened to it. while people were still being arbitrarily suspended on the basis of accusations about this, that, or the other. Some may be real, some may not. Some we know to have been false. It was only when the General Secretary was replaced and Jenny Formby was able to start some serious work that the problem could begin to be dealt with. And the NEC Code of Conduct is a very serious attempt to supply the rules which are necessary if we are going to have a campaign against anti-Semitism in the party, but a campaign that preserves free speech within the party, and a campaign that sees that justice is done to people who are accused of terrible things, many of whom we know are not guilty of the things they have been accused of. The heart of the conflict, the heart of this dispute, is the IHRA definition, which Labour adopted, a 38-word definition, some while ago. But Labour did not adopt the notes of guidance which came with it, and they didn't adopt them because they were not really fit for purpose. Many people have said this, and let's be clear, first of all, there's no contention about some of the central points made in the illustrations to the IHRA definition. We all recognise and condemn talk of bloodline, Holocaust denial, international Jewish banking conspiracies to rule the world, slurs of kikes and yids, and more. We condemn these as anti-Semitic rhetoric, and it is quite simply unacceptable. Labour's Code of Conduct goes further than the IHRA definition in listing out the kinds of things that are unacceptable, that have no place in an anti-racist party like the Labour Party. But what the definition also does, and this is the heart of the problem, it creates the presumption that criticism of Israel, unless proved otherwise, is likely to be anti-Semitic. That's what that document does. That, in my view, is the purpose of that document and the structure of the document. It did not originate in 2016, by the way, as a response to a new crisis. It's a rehash of an old document from 2005 designed to collect statistics for comparative purposes, which was found not fit for purpose and put to bed about 6 years later. It re-emerged under the auspices of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, and since then it has been packaged and packed and circulated, and demands have been made that councils adopted, that governments adopted, that parties adopted, and so on. It is not a document that can stand the weight that is being put on it. Its examples... Let me just give a couple of critiques, explanations of how it puts the onus on critics of Israel to justify the fact that they don't have ulterior motives. It's subtle in some ways. It's got phrases like criticism of Israel similar to that levelled against any other country cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic, a phrase wheeled out to show there is no problem with this document. Or applying double standards by requiring of Israel a behaviour not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. What could be fairer? All this begs many questions. Specifically, why you can only criticise an injustice if you criticise all other injustices at the same time. If you call for action against Israel, but you fail to call for action against Myanmar in the same breath, then clearly your motivation has to be suspect. But furthermore, the document ignores the fact that Israel isn't, in every respect, like every other country. What other country refuses to define its borders? Rules as illegal, a proposal put to the Israeli parliament a couple of months ago to make Israel a state of all its citizens. What are states except states of their citizens? It's an illegal proposal in Israel to push this forward. It's only a state for its ethnic majority members. It has been in belligerent occupation of another people for over 50 years and counting. There are not many states that fit this kind of situation. It's difficult to make comparisons when you're criticizing Israel for these things. Okay, its examples of anti-Semitism are prefaced by saying, taking into account the context, various things might be anti-Semitic. One of the examples it gives is justifying the killing or harming of Jews in the name of a radical ideology. How can that not be anti-Semitic? That sits there with another example, saying the state of Israel is a racist endeavour. Well, if the one is anti-Semitic, the other, by being in the same list of categories, surely must be anti-Semitic. But whether the state of Israel is a racist endeavour is a philosophical and a political question, not a question that can be answered in this kind of way. So what do we do? Sorry, I've been told I have 2 minutes, I've barely begun. What do we do? We fight tooth and nail for the NEC Code of Conduct and against the incorporation of the IHRA definition. Step one. If we lose, the war is not over. The war in local authorities, the war in the universities is independent of what the Labour NEC decides in September anyway. The IHRA definition is here and we have to fight its implementation. We have to fight the way in which it is used to deny freedom of speech, to chill discussion, not actually to stop it, sometimes it does, but very often to make people wary of even raising the issues because of the fear that they will be accused of anti-Semitism. That is what we need to do, is to take the fight to define what is anti-Semitism out to the branches of the movement. And here the weakness of the IHRA definition is our strength. For all the definition has to say is that anti-Semitism is a certain attitude towards Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards them. Hardly helpful when you're dealing with actual cases in the real world. We can be guided by a letter which appeared in The Guardian recently, signed by 27 prominent Jewish cultural figures and subsequently endorsed by others. A precondition for fighting anti-Semitism effectively is clarity about what it is and what it is not. Anti-Semitism is discrimination, prejudice, or hostility against Jews because we are Jews. It is a form of racism. It may be manifested in violence, denial of rights, discriminatory acts, prejudice-based behaviour, verbal or written statements, negative stereotypes, or stereotyping. Criticism Israel is not anti-Semitic unless motivated by anti-Jewish prejudice. That's the key. Criticism of Israel can be anti-Semitic, but in general it is not. And the aim of the IHRA definition is to introduce the presumption that in general it probably is. It has to be resisted tooth and nail, and we must take that definition up. So let's have clarity. It's not about anti-Semitism. We're all agreed on that. We are all opposed to it. We all want to fight it tooth and nail. If that is what the people who are putting pressure on Jeremy and the Labour Party wanted, we would have been able to sit down ages ago and hammer out how to deal with anti-Semitism. What they want is a different project. They want to compromise the right for free speech on the issue of Israel and Palestine. And here we must be careful. In our language, when we criticize Israel and Palestine, we mustn't fall into their traps and find forms of criticism which they are able to exploit in order to present our criticism as anti-Semitic. What the Israeli government does, what the Zionist movement historically did to the Palestinians in dispossessing them, these are matters of fact, which we can talk about proudly and openly without fear, and we must do so. What we must do is what we need to do a while ago, put Palestine back on the agenda in the centre. We must work with those in Israel and Palestine who are opposed to what is happening there. There is a very fine movement of Jews and Arabs within Israel standing together who, as they say, recognise the interconnections of the ongoing occupation of Palestinian territories, the growing social and economic disparities within Israeli society, and the attacks by the government on democratic freedoms and on the Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel. We cannot solve one of these problems without solving the other. And finally, we must move out and reconstruct how we do politics and political dialogue. At the moment, it is abuse. And social media have not helped. People reach for their phone and the most appalling things are unleashed by people from all sides in this debate. We've got to think, we've got to speak carefully, we've got to speak precisely, we've got to stand by the principles that we all support: justice, dignity, equality, internationalism, anti-racism, human rights. That way we will win. Thank you.
You will have noticed that we don't have Ben Jamal on the platform. He's unwell, but we are extremely pleased that in his stead we are joined by Bernard Regan, who described himself to me as just an executive member of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. He is indeed so much more than that. The floor is yours, Bernard.
Thanks very much, Christine. I want to begin by associating myself with Richard's remarks that he has just made. I think at this point in time I was very moved and hopeful about the letter which appeared in The Guardian, signed by some of the founders of the Anti-Nazi League, calling for the re-establishment of a united anti-racist movement in this country. And building unity against racism, anti-Semitism and fighting against anti-Semitism will be part and parcel of that, and I think we should all commit ourselves to ensuring that that is the case. When we look around Europe and we see the rise of the far right, we can see that anti-Semitism is part and parcel of that. And what a tragic irony that it's Benjamin Netanyahu who's welcoming one of the biggest anti-Semites in Europe, the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, to Jerusalem in order to greet him and to welcome him alongside himself. There's no contradiction whatsoever in opposing anti-Semitism and fighting against it and supporting the rights of the Palestinians. As Christine said, in our union, the National Education Union, we've been absolutely crystal clear that that is the case. But I think we face a real challenge at this moment in time, not only in the respect of challenging and dealing with the questions of racism generally in society, Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, but also with the way in which we are seeing a shift in respect of the position and the place of the Palestinians. And it gives me great concern about that, because Trump's move to recognise Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, I think, is an indicator of the sort of attitude that the United States government is going to pursue. An attitude which is not new. It was actually spelt out in 1996 in a document produced for Benjamin Netanyahu's election campaign, called A Clear Break. And it was a document which spelt out an alternative strategy, that instead of Israel presenting itself as the victim in the situation, it should seek to assert itself in the Middle East region. It should seek to pursue, by what they call hot pursuit, Palestinians, and have no mercy in terms of doing that. And that it should also present itself as a strategic ally of the United States in the region. I think that is the background to what is happening. And that is a shift in the nature of Israeli politics, which is quite fundamental, quite aggressive and quite assertive in terms of the position that it's adopted. And I say that that document is not just kind of something to gloss over, because the authors of that document were people like Richard Pearl, David Wormser, Douglas Feith and so on. And they were people who were actually working for Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush, and some of them are now working alongside John Bolton, who is the National Security Advisor to Donald Trump. So there is a continuity there in terms of neo-colonial and neo-imperialism attitudes towards the Middle East and to what the United States seeks to do. And I think that is part and parcel of what we're seeing from Israel, the sort of politics that Netanyahu exudes in this present point in time. The other document that I think that is worth reflecting on is a report that was produced in November 2010 by a body called the Rayot Institute. This is a think tank based in Israel, which went through systematically developing and laying out a strategy for dealing with what it described as the delegitimization of Israel that was taking place on an international scale. And they indicated in that report that one of the centres that they were most concerned about and on which they were going to focus the most attention was London. And they singled out the Palestine Solidarity Campaign as part of that, saying that these were people who philosophically and politically were critical of Israel. It's interesting, they didn't say they were anti-Semites, it said that they were politically and philosophically critical of Israel and Israel's policies. And that is the reality. And what this document sought to do was to develop what they called an open tent approach to building an alternative to challenge that solidarity movement which was being built on an international scale. An open tent approach, which they say we should minimise disagreements between those who are critical of Israel and focus on the question of challenging any attacks on Israel itself as a Jewish state and making that a central tenet of the arguments that they put forward. And they say, and it's quite almost amusing, they say we want to target, and this is their words, the far liberal and progressive left. I've never heard of a far liberal, but anyway, far left I've heard of, not far liberal. But they say this is who we want to target because these people, and they're quite explicit and quite conscious, these are the people who will be most effective in actually challenging those who are building solidarity with the Palestinian people. And I think you can see, if you like, some of the fruits of that argument in that document reflected in some of the strategies that we're seeing emerging in terms of the current debate about the question of anti-Semitism and the whole question of what is happening in Britain with regard to the allegations and accusations that are made. I am clear that anti-Semitism has absolutely no place in the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. It has no place in the Palestine Solidarity movement as a whole. We're absolutely resolute on that. But when they talk, as they did in the Rail Institute document, or when they talk in some of the people who are critical of the positions we've taken about the delegitimization of Israel, let's be absolutely clear. The people who most delegitimize Israel are the Israeli politicians who are responsible for massacring the Palestinians. Thousands of Palestinians killed in 2008 with Operation Cast Lead. 85% of those people killed non-combatants, civilians. These are not my figures. These are not figures produced by the PLO publicity department. These are the figures of the United Nations recording exactly what happened during that period of time. So when we talk about, or they talk rather, about delegitimization, let's be absolutely clear. What delegitimizes Israel's politics is the truth, and they can't confront it, so they want to gag everybody who speaks the truth about what is happening. Operation Protective Edge, which took place in 2014, when again 83% of those killed were actually non-combatants. 91 families completely wiped out. Completely, every single member of those families killed. Something like 400,000 people displaced as a result of the bombing that took place during that period of time. Absolutely horrendous, and you have to say there is only one word to describe that kind of action, and that is genocide. And people that commit genocide. So it's not a question of delegitimizing Israel by presenting false stories, or making up stories, or fabricating it. It is actually by giving people the truth about what is taking place that is challenging most centrally the way in which the Israeli government is acting. I think we have to be clear about this, and clear also that what is taking place is not just those assaults, but the expansion of the settlements. There are now something like 750,000 Israeli settlers now on the West Bank and East Jerusalem. We're seeing a situation, and I was there only a few months ago, where East Jerusalem is being surrounded by settlements that are being built, incorporating it into the body of the Israeli state. We're seeing a situation in which there is carte blanche for settlers who attack Palestinians in the West Bank, and we're seeing the most horrendous situation developing. We see in places like Hebron, children attacked on their way to school, stoned, abused, physically assaulted. That kind of activity, sadly one has to say, is a daily occurrence, and it's a tragedy that one has to say that, but that is the absolute truth. We will build a solidarity movement that will give hope and support and strength to the Palestinians in their campaign. We have a responsibility to do that, because historically Britain was at the beginning of the story, and we must build an international solidarity movement that ends that injustice that took place against the Palestinians. South Africa, and by the way, just a brief note, I don't think the situation in Israel and the West Bank is one of apartheid. I say that because actually the situation is worse. Because the truth of the matter in South Africa is that the white ruling class needed the black majority workers in the mines and the farms and so on. The Israeli ruling class don't want the Palestinians, and that's the tragedy. So there is not a direct parallel. There are moral, if you like, and ethical comments that we can make that can make parallels with what happened in South Africa to what is happening now to the Palestinians. But believe it or not, I think it's correct to say the situation is far worse for the Palestinians and the challenge far greater than that which existed in South Africa, because the internal contradiction of South Africa is that the white ruling class needed the black workers to work in their farms and their mines, in their factories, in their docks and so on. But the situation in South Africa was altered by three components. One was actually the resistance of the African National Congress and the black majority to the horrendous situation they faced. The second, which was critical, was the building of a mass international solidarity movement that helped shift the balance of forces. And that is crucial in relation to Palestine. When you think the supporters that the Israeli state has, the funds that they receive from the United States government, and the backing implicit and complicit by the European Union and the British government as well. So we need to build that international solidarity movement. We need to support initiatives that carry that forward. And we want to see, as happened in South Africa, that the ruling class, those in a ruling position in that society, come to a recognition they can no longer go on treating those they are subjugating in the way in which they have. And I think we should always be optimistic about that. Of course, the numbers inside Israel in the Jewish community that recognise that are small at this point in time. Tragically, we lost Yuri Avneri a couple of days ago, one of the people who was opposed to the way in which the Israeli government acted. But as Richard said earlier, there are groups like Stand Together, which organised a 30,000-strong demonstration in Tel Aviv against a state law which was introduced in the last few weeks by the Knesset. There are many other courageous voices that are there. We should give them too our solidarity, because they will be the people who will change or help to change the balance of forces within Israeli society that brings about justice. We're going to carry on and continue fighting against anti-Semitism, opposing it with all our strength and all our hearts. But also we're going to go on building a mass solidarity movement in support of the Palestinian people's right for justice. Thank you.
If you don't feel that you know enough in detail about the Balfour Declaration, I commend to you the book written by Bernard Regan on that very subject. It's an extremely good read. Okay, thanks Bernard. And our next speaker is Lindsey, known to, I was going to say most of you, but I can't believe actually that it isn't all of you, from a number of campaigns, but here this evening, speaking on this platform as convener of Stop the War. Lindsey.
Thanks very much, Christine, and it's brilliant to see such a huge crowd of people here tonight. And I think what it signifies is that despite the school holidays and despite the number of people who are away, this is an issue which is really gripping so many people on the left. And I think it is for a number of reasons. The first, I think, and I feel this personally, I'm sure many people in the room feel it personally, I feel quite upset about the kind of attacks, not just on Jeremy Corbyn, but on the whole of the left, and the idea that anti-Semitism is this huge problem on the left, because those of us on the left who've been campaigning for years, and Bernard's just referred to it, who've been talking about racism for decades now, and who've been fighting against racism for decades now, it's somehow very galling to find the Daily Mail and the Daily Express, who spend all their time scapegoating migrants and refugees and Muslims and everybody else, suddenly saying that this is a problem not of the right. And let's remember, anti-Semitism traditionally is a problem of the right, and the far right, with the most terrible consequences, as we know from the Holocaust, but are now trying to say that this is something which the left has to deal with rather than the right. And I also feel upset about it for another reason, that we talk about Jewish people and what Jewish people have suffered, not just with the Holocaust, but with pogroms and with discrimination going back centuries. But I also feel, again as a socialist of many, many years, that many of the campaigns I've been identified with and that have been during my life and that I've recognised as crucial in changing the world have been ones where Jewish people played a disproportionate role, in terms of whether you talk about the civil rights in the United States, where many Jewish people very courageously went to the South to help organise, whether you talk about women's liberation, whether you talk about anti-apartheid. All of those had a huge Jewish component, and I think it's something that all of us need to reflect on, how it is that we've got to this situation, and how it is indeed that Jeremy Corbyn, who is a man who is a lifelong anti-racist, who I know, as do many people on the platform, and knowing Jeremy, many of the people in the room as well, and who I've discussed all sorts of things to do with racism, to do with anti-Semitism over the years. The idea that he can be pilloried in this kind of way, I find absolutely disgraceful, as somebody who I believe has no anti-Semitism within him and would do everything that he can to fight against anti-Semitism everywhere that he works. That we do believe that racism is growing and that anti-Semitism is growing. If you look at in Hungary, where the campaigns against George Soros are clearly very, very strongly anti-Semitic. If you look in Austria, where they're talking about making people register to get kosher meat, all of these things are things which anybody who is on the left has to oppose, and we have to oppose it in our own organisations and on the left where it does arise, and it does arise. But again, let's look at what the scale of this is. There is clearly a problem of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party. Is it a huge problem? I don't think so. I certainly think it's far less of a problem than Islamophobia inside the Tory party, when we've had Boris Johnson talking about women in niqabs as looking like letterboxes, or indeed when we had Zach Goldsmith waging one of the most Islamophobic election campaigns against Sadiq Khan for Mayor of London. So I think we need to put this in a context of a racist society, a very deeply racist society that we live in, and the way that those arguments come up. When we look at this current crisis, I think this is the most serious crisis that Jeremy Corbyn has faced. I think it's a crisis for the whole left. It's one where you've got a combination of the media, the Tories, the right-wing Labour MPs, and Benjamin Netanyahu are all constantly on the attack over Jeremy Corbyn and this supposed anti-Semitism. I think we have to say, what is this about? And to me, what it is about they are terrified of a Labour leader, of a leader of a party which is growing, which, if you include its full members and its affiliated members, is something like 800,000 in this country today. They are terrified of having a leader of that party who is somebody who is against the dominant foreign policy in this country, who has opposed the wars, who has opposed the occupations, who opposes the way in which Israel treats the Palestinians, has not been afraid to stand up for that. But it's also about his domestic policy as well. They do not want somebody who is going to look at the redistribution of wealth and power in this country, and that is what they are terrified. It's also about politics in the Middle East. Bernard and Richard have talked about this. What exactly can we say about a country like Israel, about a Prime Minister like Netanyahu, who fated Trump when the embassy in Jerusalem, Trump's daughter went there, who at the same time that they were drinking and enjoying themselves, 60 people in Gaza were being shot by the Israeli army for daring to demand the right of return. This is the kind of country that we are talking about. We are talking about one which has just passed a national law which makes it even more of a state where Palestinians are discriminated against in terms of not being able to live in certain areas. And of course the fact is that any Jewish person anywhere in the world has the right to go and live in Israel. But the people, the Palestinians and the descendants of the Palestinians who were driven out of their homes and off their land in 1948 do not have that right to go there. And that strikes me as a state which is built on discrimination and which is built on the idea of two people living together. Very, very centrally involved, particularly in the Palestine movement in 2009. And I think a lot of this dates from the huge success that we had in opposing Operation Cast Lead then. We had these gigantic demonstrations. We built very, very big movement, which all around the world, people recognised that Britain and London in particular was a place where Palestine solidarity was actually very, very important and a very, very major strain of our politics. So guess what? Who becomes the ambassador for Israel at the Israeli embassy? The man who was the spokesman who day after day defended the bombing of children in Cast Lead in 2009. Mark Regan was the person who is now the Israeli ambassador here in London. And there is one reason why he was sent to London, and that was to make sure that he did everything he could to weaken this movement. Now, I don't know how much the Israeli embassy is involved in. We know they're involved with Labour Friends of Israel, we know they're involved with Conservative Friends of Israel. I don't know how much they are involved in these attacks on Jeremy Corbyn, but we do know that one of their employees, a man called Shai Massot, was actually recorded by Al Jazeera last year as saying that he wanted to take down, not a Labour politician, a Tory politician, who was too friendly to the Palestinians. Now, he had to leave in disgrace and all that, but nothing has happened to change that. So I think we have to be very, very aware that there is a major operation going on to try to link anti-Semitism with the question of opposing what Israel is doing. And I have to say now that I'm not a member of the Labour Party, but I would say to anybody, whether you're in the Labour Party or whether you're outside the Labour Party, I am not going to stop criticising Israel. I'm not going to stop showing solidarity with the Palestinians. I'm not going to say that I will agree with it because we're told that we can't say anything because it's anti-Semitic. I do believe that every single one of us can distinguish between anti-Semitism, which is racism and has to be opposed, and criticism of a state which is treating the Palestinians in the way that it does. And we have to be able to say, yes, we oppose anti-Semitism, but we are not going to stop for a minute our criticisms of Israel. And I would say on this, the world will be watching this. If the IHRA definition with all its examples is agreed by the NEC, and I hope very, very much it isn't, and I hope very, very much that Labour Party members do what they can to make sure it isn't, this will be seen by the Palestinians as a defeat for their cause, and quite rightly it will be seen as a defeat for their cause, which will make it harder for them and harder for the people who want to show solidarity in this country. Just finally, I want to say this. I think what is going on in the Labour Party at the moment is nothing short of a politically motivated witch hunt. I think there are so many people who are being accused of things. Sometimes maybe they say things that are stupid, sometimes they say things that are wrong. It may be that in a few cases they say things which are anti-Semitic, in which case they shouldn't be members of the Labour Party. But many people, including people like Mark Wadsworth, it seemed to me, whether you agreed with what he said or not, it wasn't an anti-Semitic remark. And we can go back in history looking at witch hunts and look at when people are attacked in this kind of way. There's only one way to deal with a witch hunt, You have to stand up to it. It's no good saying, well, I didn't agree with what my neighbour said, I didn't agree with what my workmate said, I didn't agree with the person next to me. You have to stand up and say, this isn't about the issue that they say it's about. It's about stopping opposition on this question, and more broadly, it's about stopping the development of a mass left movement which can lead to a Corbyn government. That's what they want to do. My time up. Okay, just finally, in 1 minute, just to say this. So what do we have to do? Firstly, we have to oppose all racism, including anti-Semitism. It's very, very important that we do. We have to build a huge anti-racist movement in this country to defeat Tommy Robinson and all those people. Secondly, we have to stand with Jeremy Corbyn. We have to be absolutely clear that he has done nothing wrong. We have to show our solidarity with the Palestinians. The Palestinians have suffered now for more than 70 years. It is time to end that suffering. There are all sorts of debates and discussions about how you end it, but the crucial question is our solidarity has to be there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lindsey. Our next speaker, I'm delighted to say, works for a union very close to my heart. She is Huda, and she is a young Labour activist. Always nice to have a young person on the stage. A young Labour activist, and she's a candidate for Labour's NEC.
And I sort of wanted to also echo the need that many speakers have also talked about for to clarify and to simplify our point and to kind of return it to the sort of thread that connects all of this, which is the talk about the human rights abuses against the Palestinian people under military occupation. We have to return it to that, because that is the important thing that is being lost in all of this. About the wider context of this and kind of link it back to colonialism, which was really the mechanics and the machinations of sort of imperialist worldview, which relied very, very heavily on the erasure of indigenous population. And it's done this for generations, and it continues until this day. And it's why English is the official language for so many ex-colonies, and why skin whitening cream is a booming business, particularly in Africa, but also in South Asia. Transplanting these Western norms and placing them into a context so that you can convince people that they are inferior. That in and of itself is the machine that is fueling so much of this. To control and to exploit, you have to disassociate. You have to convince people that this population is historyless. And you have to, again, that's why it's so important to challenge this idea that scramble for Africa or colonialism or what happened in Palestine is just about labour markets, about resources and so forth. It has to be placed back into the core issue in all of this, which is that it's about erasing indigenous populations in order to control and in order to dominate. And I think that this issue isn't confined to faraway lands. However much we try and create that distance, may it be academically, may it be societally, histories of migrant communities here in Britain are also being erased from public discussion. They're absent in our schools. I mean, I know, I don't know about many of you, but I know when I was studying history at school, every single time that we talked about the world politics, it would be through the gaze of World War II, and would kind of present this idea that this is a seminal moment in British engagement with the world, completely ignoring empire, completely ignoring how much we have created. We've murdered, we've pillaged, we've done all these things in the world. We're going to focus on World War II, and again, focus it in a European theatre. I'm not even going to talk about all the other stages and all the other... From my perspective, I'm Somali. I mean, we had literally Italian Somaliland and British Somaliland, and you had people, the Italian Somaliland, they were fighting each other, one fascist, one democratic, supposedly. I mean, they had nothing to do with it, absolutely nothing to do with it. And I think that all of this, when we talk about Palestine, it is steeped in this colonial history. It's steeped in it, and it's also steeped in a powerful anti-colonial history. And I think that's what we have to be talking about, and we have to be challenging this deliberate system of erasure. And that's the problem with this debate. It's that Palestinians have been completely erased from it, and again, deliberately so. in forgetting that throughout the 20th century, most people in the world were fighting liberation struggles, and that the Palestinian people were fighting harder still with all of our international solidarity. I think that's one of the things we have to be proudest about in the Labour movement, is the fact that we've stood consistently, shoulder to shoulder with the Palestinian people, and we can't be kind of taking steps back and regressing in a sense just because of this sensationalist sort of like news headlines and all this sort of stuff that are pressuring, that are being forced by regressive groups in order to forget that, because if you forget it, then you can capitulate. I think that because colonialism isn't over, of course it isn't. I mean, that's why Palestine is so important. When we look at what's happening there, it's a settler colonial state in today, in 2018, and that's what we're fighting against. So we should see having a pro-Palestinian leader like Jeremy Corbyn, perhaps the most pro-Palestinian in our party's history, as a direct disavowal against British imperialism. And the establishment and the political class are obviously going to kick back about that. I mean, they were always going to do all they can to try and tear him down. I mean, capitalists and neo-colonialists across the world that are stringing together and sustaining this world order were not going to respect Jeremy's mandate, you know, what he was elected on as Labour leader. They were, of course, going to fight back. And I think that when we look at, again, institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, financial institutions who literally have money stained with blood, they're holding that money, sustaining that exploitation, of course they weren't going to respect Jeremy's mandate. Of course they were. But this is far bigger than that. I think the point that I'm trying to make in all of this is that we have to reorientate. We have to take charge of this discussion, and we have to bring it back to what is important. We have to champion the survival of our Labour movement, which is linked to the internationalism that is core to its beliefs. And we have to, and I know that we're making sort of comparisons about South Africa before, but again, this kind of idea of erasing and rewriting history. I mean, liberal ideologies will now have you believe that South Africa was won because everybody liked peace and everyone just accepted it and was like, yeah, that would be great, why don't we just end it, end apartheid? No, that's fought for, it's fought hardly fought. And I think that political consensus was won, and I think we are winning the political consensus here in Britain on Palestine, and I think that is what we are trying to sustain here. And whereas, so I think that what they're trying to subvert here is our ability to be loud and unapologetic about being anti-colonial. And I think that is what we have to be fighting for. And I think the IHRA document, we have to really move back and look at it and say that this isn't a binary. This isn't about either we accept it and then obviously we'll all automatically stop being anti-Semitic, although obviously the argument is that obviously that's not the case. That was never the case. That was never the issue. But I think that we can't accept that binary, and we have to be able to create a code of conduct that makes sure that we're fighting anti-Semitism, because it fails to do that. I mean, if we look at the context in Austria, which we were talking about as being incredibly anti-Semitic, and when it was trying to ban kosher meat, etc. I mean, you'd think that would fall foul of IHRA, but it didn't. It didn't, because the part of it that says in the examples is that it has to be motivated by hatred of Jewish people. And then the Minister for Animal Welfare, who tried to ban kosher meat, said, no, it was animal welfare based. That's what we were banning kosher meat on. So it didn't fall foul of it. So we are failing Jewish people, and more importantly, we're criminalising Palestinian activism. That's what this is about. So I think we can't accept this document, and I think we have to do all we can to shape a consensus, not just within the party, but across society, that the Palestinian struggle is key. It's key to a Jeremy Corbyn-led government, and it's key to our Labour movement. So yes. I was also going to say that the solidarity that's come out of this has been so amazing. I mean, obviously, just looking at this hall and all the people that are still outside, wanting to come here and all that sort of stuff, I think it's amazing, and that the appetite for this and understanding how ridiculous this kind of the semantics of how it's being presented are. I think beyond that as well, I mean, we've had letters in the Guardian from Jewish organisations and Jewish people. We've also had letters in the Guardian from migrant organisations and Palestinians here in Britain. I think the pushback is there, and it is strong, and I think that we should all stand up and continue to be unapologetic in our support for the Palestinian struggle. Thank you.
Is in good hands. I said at the beginning that we might try and speakers outside because there were still 50 people trying to get in, but apparently it would be a public disorder problem, too much noise and stuff. So we're not able to do that. So every one of you who knows someone who didn't get into this meeting tonight has to make sure that you go and speak to them and say what a brilliant meeting it was and how absolutely terrific all the speakers were and how they should get here early for our next speaker is someone who I had the immense pleasure and privilege of listening to when we had a Palestine Solidarity West London meeting some months ago. The first of our very warm days it was, so we were all sitting in an overheated church hall in Hammersmith. But it was fun. It was absolutely worth being there. And it was about the question of apartheid in South Africa, some things which Bernard alluded in his remarks. So our next speaker is Salma Karmi-Ayyoub. She is a British-Palestinian human rights lawyer. The floor is yours, Salma.
Very much. Hi everyone. It's great to see you all here. As been said in mid-August, this is brilliant, and I'm really pleased as well to speak on this platform on this issue. And I'm very also impressed by the fact that my colleagues have really situated this discussion very much in the context of Israel-Palestine, which is something that I wanted to do, and to really emphasise, I suppose, to you this evening that this, to my mind, this really is about Israel and Palestine, much more than it is about anti-Semitism. And I'll come to explain why. So I think what I'd like to do in the time I have is to first of all put this into some kind of context and explain that this is really an Israeli state spearheaded campaign to silence criticism of Israel. And I'd like to look at a very specific angle of it, which is this question of Israeli legitimacy, and say that I think that this campaign is really about Israel trying to solve its legitimacy crisis. And I'll explain why I think that's the case. And then finally, if I have time, I'd just like to say that if the campaign that Israel is spearheading succeeds, it will impoverish Palestinian advocacy, and it will cause some very serious problems for the Palestinian struggle for justice. And that's why it's really important that we do all oppose it as best we can. So let me start by saying that I think, although of course we have all of these machinations within the Labour Party, and with specifically the IHRA document, and all of the things that are happening on campuses in this country, I think that this issue we're facing in the UK now and today is a manifestation of a broader Israeli spearheaded campaign which has been ongoing for at least the last 15 years. And what it seeks to do is to define something called a new anti-Semitism. And it says, Israeli propaganda says, this new anti-Semitism, which is apparently now proliferating, is really anti-Zionism. It's people who oppose either the establishment of Israel or the continued existence of Israel in its current form. Those sorts of ideas, which we can summarize as being anti-Zionist ideas, are inherently, in and of themselves, anti-Semitic. And I don't have much time, so I'm not going to go into the history of how this campaign was started by Israel and why it came about. Just to say that there is a lot of evidence that this is really something that the Israeli state has been pushing for a good 15 years now. And we see it, I think, on our doorstep, as has been said, because of the fact that Corbyn, the potential of a prime minister in the shape of Jeremy Corbyn, is just too much of a threat to the established order in various different ways to be tolerated. It's a threat, I think, to the right in various ways, and it's very much, of course, a threat to Israel because of Corbyn's pro-Palestinian record. And so I think you're seeing this convergence of interests between, the right, between Israel seeking to, I would say it's not an overstatement to say, to destroy Corbyn's leadership and the politics that he represents. So I think that's where we're at, but I think that this is an Israeli state spearheaded campaign, and it's been going on for longer than it has in this country, and we shouldn't forget that. So the next thing I want to address is the question of why Israel is pursuing this campaign at all. And I think really it all comes down to a question over Israeli legitimacy. And this is what I mean. So if you look at the central assertion that's going on with the IHRA battle at the moment, in fact, it's really focused in on this one particular sentence that the Israel lobby wants Labour to adopt and that other people are pushing against, which says that it would be anti-Semitic to deny the Jewish right to self-determination, e.g. by claiming a state of Israel is a racist endeavour. And I think that we need to take a step back and examine that assertion. To my mind, it's actually very odd that a question over what is or isn't anti-Semitic, i.e. racist, is boiling down to a question mark over whether or not a people have a right to self-determination through the creation of a state. But I think it's that example that gives us the insight into precisely what is motivating this campaign. So that sentence, denying the Jewish right to self-determination, e.g. by claiming the state of Israel as a racist endeavour, a state of Israel as a racist endeavour, is pretty incoherent. But I think what it's really doing is it's conflating a couple of things for a start. It's saying the right to Jewish self-determination means the formation of an Israel. And we all know what that really means in practice. It means Israel that exists now, a Jewish state in Palestine. And it's saying that it's anti-Semitic to oppose that formula in any form. So if you say, I don't think there should be an Israel in Palestine, or I don't think that Israel should be the state it is, which is a Jewish state, i.e. the expression of the right of Jewish self-determination in Palestine, then you are in some way or other, according to the IHRA document, an anti-Semite, and you're not allowed to say it, right? And I think that therein is the kind of purpose of the campaign, which is, I think, to silence any challenge to the notion that it is completely right and completely legitimate that a state like Israel should have been established and should be maintained in the land of Palestine, and should be maintained as a Jewish state, as an ethnic Jewish state. So any challenge to that assumption becomes anti-Semitic and therefore out of bounds. And I think the purpose, therefore, of this whole campaign is to kind of create a situation where it is Israel's existence in its current form as a Jewish state in Palestine is sacrosanct. It's an unchallengeable premise in any discussion about Israel-Palestine. Now, why is this happening at the moment? And again, because of time, I won't go into it in too much depth, but I do think we're at a sort of historical moment where Israel is pushing it's behind this assault to stop or silence any question mark over Israel's legitimacy, essentially, because that's what it is. Because Israel is, in the moment, experiencing a legitimacy crisis. And I think it's experiencing a legitimacy crisis, basically, to summarize it, because Israel is now presiding over the whole territory of historical Palestine. And it's therefore presiding over a binational reality. There's basically an equal number of Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs in that country. And yet it's a state which, and we can come back to this if people are not aware of it, it's a state which constitutionally privileges Jews, ensures a kind of Jewish supremacy, and excludes and dispossesses and disenfranchises and discriminates against the Palestinian Arabs. I.e., it's essentially an apartheid state over a binational reality. And that's something which I don't think is really acceptable anymore in the 21st century. It's anachronistic in that way. And for that reason, more and more news is coming out of Israel. Of course, Palestinians on the ground are resisting this apartheid situation. Israel then takes measures to repress that resistance, which are draconian. You then get a whole media coverage of all of the various abuses which are happening, and it's leading people, and I think Israel is aware of this, it's leading people in the public more and more to question what is up with this state. It's not just a question of we don't like the Likud government or Netanyahu did something horrible the other day. the question starts to become, what kind of a state carries out this kind of apartheid? What kind of a state occupies territory that doesn't belong to it for 50 years of its 70-year existence? So what you have is Israel being very insecure about its legitimacy in world public opinion, and instead of fixing its legitimacy crisis by fixing its policies, right, by dismantling some of these constitutional problems that result in apartheid, instead what Israel's doing is trying to get everyone to shut up about it. And it's also doing some things on the ground in Israel and Palestine you'll be aware of, like entrenching its Jewish state character through this new law, and by being ever more oppressive towards the Palestinians. So it's kind of buckling down and saying, we're going to carry on being this apartheid, settler, colonial type regime and hope we can get people to stop challenging our legitimacy. So that's what's behind it. Now, briefly, just to sort of conclude, I don't know how long have I got left? 2 minutes. Okay. What's the effect of all of this if it works? So what will be the impact on Palestinian advocacy if Israel succeeds in making this equation between sort of anti-Zionism or challenging Israel's legitimacy and anti-Semitism, so that we're no longer allowed to challenge Israel's legitimacy? What will be the impact on us as Palestinians and our advocacy? And I think it will greatly impoverish our advocacy if that campaign succeeds in two main ways. First of all, I think it will seriously hinder what it is that we're allowed to say and what it is that we're allowed to oppose. So, if you're not allowed to question Israel's legitimacy as a current kind of Jewish ethnic state in Israel-Palestine, in other words, you're not allowed to challenge the Zionist nature of the Israeli state, then you can't oppose policies that flow from its Zionist nature, such as the discriminatory practice that was alluded to, where all Jews can get citizenship in Israel, Palestinians are denied that right. If you say, well, that's not okay, and as a Palestinian I want the right to citizenship in Israel, and as a Palestinian I want to exercise my right of return, you're told that you're challenging something fundamental about Israel, and therefore you're an anti-Semite. And it sounds far-fetched, but this has actually happened to me. I have actually been accused by an Israeli spokesperson of being an anti-Semite for advocating for the right of return. And you can see that on the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs website, under its webpage on anti-Semitism, you will see advocacy aimed at ensuring the right of return as an example of anti-Semitism. So it's weird, it's crazy when you say it. I hope it sounds crazy to you when I explain it this way, but it's actually happening. The second thing, I think, briefly, that would happen is we would have trouble in essentially presenting a coherent kind of narrative about what our cause is and what our claims are. Because we need to be able to say that we are, as Huda said, an indigenous people, in effect, struggling against settler colonialism and racism. And that the Israeli state was established as a settler colonial regime, and is a settler colonial regime today, and that explains all of its policies and practices, and explains the settlements, and explains the wars. We would need, as Palestinians, we need to be able to present a coherent narrative of why we oppose Israel in its current form, and what it is that's really happened to us as a people. And I think by silencing kind of criticism of Israel that goes to the fundamental nature of the state, it would prevent us from being able to provide and present that coherent narrative. So it would very much impoverish our advocacy and the advocacy of those who support us, and therefore our struggle for our rights. And therefore I hope, and I feel confident actually, that you will all help us Palestinians in opposing this very dangerous campaign. Thanks.
Our next speaker is Rob Ferguson, who originally said he just wanted to be described as a Jewish anti-racist campaigner, but importantly, he is also on the steering committee of free speech on Israel, and I think following from Salma's remarks there, a campaign about free speech on Israel is certainly something that's much needed, isn't it?
The reason I believe that people are becoming such huge numbers tonight is that there is a recognition way beyond this hall that what we face here is an attack on Jeremy Corbyn and the Radical Left Project. It is an attack, above all, on Palestinian solidarity and the BDS campaign. But beyond this, it represents an attack on the entire left against which we all have to unite. And I want to associate myself with the comments from Huda, Salma and Bernie Regan on the question of Palestine, because it is central. I just want to add this point, that I think the cause of Palestinian freedom speaks in its own name, but it also speaks to the struggles for freedom from imperialist interference and domination, from war and dictatorship across the Middle East, and speaks indeed to all those who believe in a world free of oppression and racism. And it is on that final note that I want to address the question of anti-Semitism. Because there is a narrative that has been promoted, especially since the early 2000s, that casts the left as having a predisposition to anti-Semitism now equal to or greater even than that on the right. This is not only a horrible distortion of both history and the present, but it is a hugely dangerous one. Anti-Semitism emerged in modern form as a reactionary ideology. It encompassed the pogroms of the Tsarist Empire from which my father's parents fled here to Britain. It became the dominant racism of the European establishment before the Second World War and culminated in the Nazi Holocaust that they termed the final solution to the Jewish question. It's true that like every form of racism, anti-Semitism has in the past and can today permeate the left. It has to be challenged without quarter wherever it rears its head, whether in the context of debates about Israel or not. But anti-Semitism is not an innate or logical consequence of a socialist view of society. It is a hostile, reactionary ideology that, like all racism, can only serve to undermine internationalism and working class solidarity. It is a different matter. Nowhere is this more evident than in my mother's native Hungary, where her sister died in the Holocaust at the hands of the Horthy regime, today being rehabilitated by Hungarian leader, Prime Minister Viktor Orban. And I just want to say something about Viktor Orban, because he is a totem iconic figure for the far right, the alt-right and the fascists today. He has led the way in speaking of a Jewish menace and casting the new Rothschild figure of the alt-right financier George Soros at the heart of it. And this was a key speech he made in front of thousands during his election campaign. We are fighting an enemy that is different from us, not open but hiding, not straightforward but crafty, not honest but base, not national but international, does not believe in working but speculates with money, does not have its own homeland but feels it owns the whole world. This could have been plucked straight out of that Tsarist forgery, the protocols of the elders of Zion. And this is the same Viktor Orban who, as a guest of Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, recently declared that anti-Semitism was declining in Eastern Europe and his native Hungary, but rising in the West at the hands of Muslim migrants and the left. And this brings me to the IHRA and the examples that the Labour NEC is under and others are under such pressure to adopt. Because at the heart of the issue is the relentless conflation between criticism of the State of Israel and anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. And the first thing to say is that positions, whether in support or against Israel, are in themselves no test whatsoever of anti-Semitism. The anti-Semite can pose as a friend of the Palestinians and anti-Zionists, or like Corbyn and Austrian Vice-Chancellor Heinz Christian Strache of the Austrian Freedom Party, founded by Nazis after the Second World War, they can pose as a friend of Israel and a supporter of the settler movement. So support for or opposition to the State of Israel in itself provides no test of who is an anti-Semite or who is not. And let's remember one thing, that at the gates of Auschwitz, the Nazis did not ask whether you were Zionist or anti-Zionist, conservative or communist, only whether your grandfather was a Jew. I'm not anti-Zionist despite the Holocaust. I'm an anti-Zionist because of it. Because I believe the only sanctuary for myself as a Jew and for others, whatever they currently perceive, lies not in a separate state, Jewish state, that rests on the dispossession of the Palestinian people, but in the solidarity and the unity against a world of war, racism, imperialism, anti-Semitism and inequality. Went to Palestine in the 30s. He saw himself as a socialist Zionist. He joined the Haganah, the Zionist militia. But he found himself forced to choose between his socialist principles and his Zionism, as he witnessed at first hand, which he described to me in much later life, the systematic exclusion through violence and force of Palestinian Arabs from the economy and from the land. And this was in the 30s. This was before 1948, before the Nakba. That process of dispossession and exclusion began long before 1948, which I believe, despite the intentions, like my father, of those seeking sanctuary, is legitimately described as a racist endeavour in that sense. And despite, now, you may disagree with such a position, but to label it as anti-Semitism is to degrade that term and devalue it and empty it, in my view, of meaning. And who has the right to tell Salma or Ahed Tamimi, who said recently that she precisely aspires to a return to the not pre-1967, pre-1948, a state in which Jew, Christian, Arab, Palestinian could live in equality in a state free of oppression, with the right They are terrified of this argument getting a hearing. And therefore, the object here is simply to ensure the voice of Palestinians and the voice of solidarity, the voice of socialists, the voice of anti-Zionist Jews is not heard. And let's be clear, if the code, if the IHRA definition is adopted, with whatever caveats, with whatever combination of the code of conduct from that the Labour that the NEC adopted. I believe we will see not a putting to bed of the question, but a vicious racking up of the witch hunt, not only within Labour. And I think in that context, it's been a fundamental misjudgment over really more than 2 years to retreat and concede and to fail. And to fail to call out those prosecuting this attack. So let me just finish with this point, which is in a way, I think, the most important. Because in this hall, on this platform, we have many different political views and perspectives and affiliations, and that is true of the left as a whole. I think the majority of the platform are probably Labour Party members. I'm a member of the SWP. In this hall, I wouldn't like to count how many different affiliations and views and perspectives we have. But our strength, however, lies in our ability to unite across those differences, to defend solidarity with Palestine and a shared aspiration for a society free of austerity and racism. And our foes may think that if they get this definition through on paper, through on the NEC of the Labour Party and so forth, that is the end of the matter. It is not. It is one thing to bring all the pressure of the establishment, of the press, of the media and so forth on those upper reaches of the representative structures. It is another thing to take on the mass movement that will fight on each campus, in every, I hope, in every constituency Labour Party, in our trade union movement, across the Palestine solidarity movement. Because together we have, as can see here, we have an untapped potential that can throw this back and restore the argument where it belongs, free Palestine, and for a different vision of Britain and society.
I'm going to ask Lindsey just to come up and make a couple of announcements about actions and activities in which people can engage beyond the end of this meeting. Over to you, Lindsey.
Thank you very much. Very proud to be here. Lindsey, Secretary, founding member, Jewish Voice for Labour. Like others on the platform, my family fled from pogroms. My partner's family lost a generation in the Holocaust. So we don't need lectures about recognising anti-Semitism. We don't need lectures from the Daily Mail, which sided with Moses fascists in 1980. We don't need lectures from the Board of Deputies, who actually counselled not to oppose those fascists and who have remained silent while we've got the growth of the football lads and their neo-fascist organisations who have remained silent and not criticised Netanyahu, as we've heard, as an ally of that disgusting politician Orbán. So I've come here to give you a couple of messages. There is no wave of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. We have several hundreds of Jewish members in the Labour Party, and there is no wave. Yes, there's individuals who are anti-Semitic, and they should be dealt with. But it's been launched in order to produce the IHRA definition as a weapon to attack Corbyn, to attack socialism, and to silence criticism on Palestine. If you want to know where they stand, look, and what its purpose is, look at that Jewish newspapers recently, the Jewish Chronicle, the Jewish News and the Jewish Telegraph, where it had there, if the 11 examples of the IHRA were in place in the Labour Party, there would have been hundreds, if not thousands, of expulsions. And I'll tell you who they'd be going for. It'd be me and you and you and all of you who are active socialists. So we know what their plan is. And we know particularly what the plan is of the Jewish Labour movement inside the Labour Party. Disgustingly, go on their website, you'll see they're planning a demonstration at the Labour Party conference against Corbyn. So we're calling on you to come to that demonstration with us, to stand up against them and in solidarity with Corbyn. To come to the demonstration, to lobby the National Executive Committee of the Labour Party to stand by their code of conduct, not to adopt the IHRA definition. And we're calling on you to take these motions and the ones by Unite, model motions, put your branches if you're in the Labour Party, go on the NEC code, the website, the hashtag, go on their website, there's a list of every member of the National Executive, lobby them, particularly if you're in the Labour Party. It's time to stand up and fight, because a people who oppress another can never themselves be free. Thank you.
It's Tara Kelly.
Friends, we've had a very strong platform tonight, and I will try not to repeat what has been said by all the speakers, with which I'm in general agreement. I will just stress what Rob Ferguson said in his speech, that something that is not covered much or talked about is how the rise of the new right in Eastern Europe has been encouraged, has been watched, has been seen by the leaders of the European Union. They knew what was going on, they couldn't stop it. And long before, when Gianfranco Fini, who was in lineal descent from Mussolini's party in Italy, as Deputy Prime Minister of Italy under Berlusconi, went on an official visit to Israel, was welcomed by Ariel Sharon. Why? Because Fini said he supported the wall that was being built, and he apologized for the minor incidents of anti-Semitism that had happened during the Mussolini period. Now, this campaign in Eastern Europe, quite, not just the countries mentioned, Hungary, etc., but in other, the former Yugoslavia is a case in point, where the Croat fascists, the Ustash, statues are being raised to them. The Ukraine, virtually the same thing is happening. People who actually fought with the Third Reich. And this is passing unnoticed. I mean, if you want to search for anti-Semitism, then search there. It's not secret, it's open, openly proclaimed. They attacked the resistance movements in Europe during the Second World War, referring to them as dominated by Jews. Very glad that they were, if they were. But this is the sort of propaganda that is going on in most parts of Eastern Europe today, and now seeping into the West. Italy is a case in point. Germany, we have seen tragic developments in recent years with the formation of far-right groups who haven't started carrying pictures of Adolf Hitler, as some groups do in Italy, re-Mussolini, because it's illegal. But don't think they don't worship him in private. So all those who thought that the growth of the far right in the 30s could never happen again, it will probably not happen in the same way again, but it is already happening. In this huge vacuum that has been created by the 2008 Wall Street crash, where the centre parties, the extreme centre parties, centre left and centre right, have failed to present any alternative to existing capitalism. So what happens in Britain? What happens in Britain that we have, if the truth be told, the equivalent of a political insurrection by the young. And it was this political insurrection by tens and tens of thousands of young people that pushed Jeremy Corbyn to where he is. It wasn't the Parliamentary Labour Party. It wasn't quite a lot of the trade unions, especially the ones who suddenly discovered in recent months that anti-Semitism exists. No, it wasn't them. It was this outpouring of anger against Thatcher, Blair, their successors, who had created this crisis, and people were desperate for something else. And in Corbyn, they saw something many young people had never experienced: social democracy. Instead, they'd experienced wars, they'd experienced austerity. So the campaign against Corbyn, which has been mounted by the British establishment, backed by the Parliamentary Labour Party or a large chunk of it, and have no doubt there are at least between 60 to 80 members of the Parliamentary Labour Party who would rather that Labour lost than Corbyn win. Explain the frothing outburst by Dame Margaret Hodge. I mean, you know, why does she have to behave in that fashion? Discredit, destroy, damage. They've done it twice before and failed. And this time they're playing the anti-Semitic card. No doubt about it at all. Do opinion polls, national surveys show that there's been a rise? A huge rise in anti-Semitism in Britain? No. They're more or less even, as they have been for the last 20, 30 years. In fact, it could be argued there was more anti-Semitism during the Attlee years, when lots of grammar schools had a Jewish quota. Wouldn't allow Jewish kids to go to the school because they were too intelligent. So that's what they said. If we do, there won't be place for other intelligent kids. There was a lot of this stuff going on in the 50s under the Attlee government. So what they fear about Corbyn is that Labour, it's not so much the social democratic reforms domestically. I mean, most of these, you know, are great given what we've been through. But Harold Wilson would have been in favour of many of them, if you think about it seriously. What they are frightened of is that this is a political leader pushed by extra parliamentary pressure from the outside. The extra parliamentary movement has gone into the Labour Party, changed its complexion on the constituency level, is trying to change it from the inside. But most importantly, he is the only leader the Labour Party has had who has been a consistent opponent of imperialism and colonialism. That's what frightens them. That is why serving generals in the British Army, Dannett, appeared on television breakfast shows to say that if Corbyn was elected Prime Minister, there would be unrest in the army. But just think this is happening in Britain. You know, no one has previously thought of Britain, apart from a few people like myself, as a banana monarchy. But that's what happened. when Corbyn wrote a letter protesting to Cameron, the reply came, well, your own front bench member was with the general and agreed with him. This was also true. One of the Eagle sisters, bless her. So this is why the stakes are so high. They feel they can't trust the Prime Minister the country might elect. And on Palestine, Jeremy has been rock solid. Rock solid for a long time. So destroy him. Finish him off. Doesn't matter if Labour loses. Doesn't matter if there's some, cobbled together awful coalition government at the centre. They're thinking about that too, by the way. One of their models for right-wing Labour MPs and hardcore Remainer Tories is Macron in France. His ratings have just plummeted, by the way. From 50 percentage points to 25. So it's a volatile situation, and people are looking for change, domestically and internationally. One of the figures not mentioned today is that consistently now, for the last 7 or 8 years, possibly longer, when European citizens, not just here, the whole of Europe are asked, which is the country that poses the biggest threat to world peace? A majority reply, Israel. And they do it because they know Israel has nuclear weapons. And they know that some of the people in charge are capable of anything, could do it. It's a great pity that the leaders of Mossad and other Israeli intelligence agencies become intelligent only after they retire. Then they make a lot of documentaries saying we've been horrible to the Palestinians. Yeah, thanks. But why didn't you do it when you were in office, when you had influence, when you had power? So targeting Netanyahu is fine, and Trump. But all these guys have done is to take off the masks. These policies of Eretz Israel, of a greater Israel, of driving the Palestinians out, of marginalizing them, have been followed by politicians from 1948 onwards. And you can read the stuff being written by revisionist historians, staunchly Zionists, who are saying it now because they feel nothing can stop them. So the solution, as many people have pointed out, obviously is mass movements. But I think, Bernard, it was you who said, if I'm not wrong, that we need a mass movement in Israel to defeat these policies. Yes, always, though there's a problem. An overwhelming majority of Israelis support these policies. An overwhelming majority. So I would add to that, is we need a huge mass movement in the United States of America to defeat these policies. Because without consistent US support, financial, political, and military, Netanyahu would not be able to get away with what he's getting away with every single day, cold-blooded murder of Palestinians. AIPAC and other Israeli lobbyist organizations in the United States are extremely worried because the last opinion poll they conducted showed that 46 to 48% of young Jewish people in the United States said that Israel was not their concern. They were not interested in it. They regarded themselves as Americans. Now, this is the first time the figures have been so high. And I notice that some of the most striking and courageous actions being carried out, both in the United States, by the way, and in Israel, are by young American Jews. For as far as last trying to cross the border to get to the Palestinians to declare their solidarity. This is what is happening. It's not widely reported. We have another problem, globally now, that writers, authors, Jewish origin in particular are targeted. The case of Norman Finkelstein is a huge scandal. Chucked out of every single university in the United States of America. Very distinguished scholar. And those of you who have the time should check out his article in defense of Corbyn. It is amazing, excellent text with lots of facts. But how the atmosphere has changed. When Norman Finkelstein's book called The Holocaust Industry came out, Raoul Hilberg, who is the great historian of the Judeo-Semitic, said he hadn't gone far enough. And Raoul Hilberg is a Republican, unlike Finkelstein, who's a socialist. Hilberg said you haven't gone far enough, and he said it in public. But the book had an impact. This now seems very difficult to believe. But the G2 section of The Guardian, under the editorship of Ian Katz at that time, himself of Jewish origin, serialized the book in 3 parts. Can you imagine The Guardian doing that now? More and more it really strikes me that what has happened to the media and the liberal press is so appalling. They're part and parcel of the center system, the extreme center system. They have basically, not always, but more or less removed dissent. So we have a huge struggle in front of us, and let's not ignore the facts. This campaign by the Israeli embassy, in league with the British political and intelligence establishments, has been successful. It has been successful. All of us today have been stressing, with some exceptions, we are not anti-Semitic. Who would have done this 10, 15, 20 years ago? It was the common sense of our movement. How could we be anti-Semitic, especially those of us who consider themselves socialists? How could we be? So we have been put on the defensive, and here I would end by saying 2 things. One, Jeremy was at his best when he took on the establishment. First in getting elected. Second, I thought one of the most courageous things he did was during the last general election campaign, when there were 2 terror attacks on this country by fundamentalist terrorists. What did he say when he was asked? He said, this is not unrelated to our foreign policy. Theresa May announced, after Corbyn had said that, now we're going to finish him off. She said it, we're going to finish him off now in public. They waited 3 days till all their private polls came in. 70% of the public agreed. 70%. And some of his closest supporters said it was a rash thing to do. But sometimes politicians have to follow their own instincts and not worry too much about what the Daily Mail is going to say. And I think if Jeremy stood up at the Labour Party conference and said, look, it is not anti-Semitic to oppose Israel any more than it's Islamophobic to oppose the monstrous regime in Saudi Arabia. To defend the right of the Palestinian people to some form of self-determination. It is not anti-Semitic to defend the BDS movement, and we will carry on doing so So do your worst. Call me any name you want under the sun. Every community is divided. To imply that all the British Jews are monolithic is nonsense. Who speaks for them in public are essentially the establishment of the Jewish community. Like many within the Muslim community who speak for it at times are the establishment of that community. How many people agree with them within these communities, we don't know. It comes out. So it's absurd to accept the definition of identity in the sense of everyone is the same. They aren't, as we've seen on this platform, two speakers, Richard Kuper, Rob Ferguson in this audience, and in many other parts of the country. So, Jeremy, don't give up, follow your instincts, don't let the spin doctors muzzle you, because what you do best is tell the truth. And when the truth is told, the people who back you are not going to step back. They want you in power.